Testing. Okay. There's the buzzing sound. Is that because it's too high? Testing. Gotta make sure we're sounding okay. This is mic 1. Yo, on mic 1. Testing. I think if we turn it up too high, the buzzing is gonna come back. Okay. All right, so back to you, and then you take the chair, and then I'll give you this one afterwards. Okay, come on in, grab a seat, cozy on up. We're a full house tonight. Thank you all for bearing with the rain and coming out to join us. Just want to start by thanking our sponsors, Cayman Enterprise City, the Blockchain Association of the Cayman Islands, Digital Cayman, and Stepping Stones Tech Recruitment. Thank you all for coming together to come to this monthly event. They've been really informative discussions. So tonight we have an action-packed panel discussion. We're going to be talking really relevant things. So I'll pass it over to Fiona, who will make introductions and take it from here. So thank you.
Thanks everyone for coming out this evening, and for those who have joined our live stream. I think everyone might have stayed up past your bedtime to join, to support me, or maybe to figure out what I do for a job, which she's still trying to get her head around. But hi, Mum, if you're out there. It's great to see everyone turn out, and there's such an interest in this panel, which is fascinating. So we're here today with some of the best next generation lawyers on Island to talk a little bit about what they're doing in this space, the kind of industry that we have here in Cayman, and hopefully to maybe inspire interns or trainees or junior lawyers, wherever you are in your career, considering a move into this industry, to tell you a little bit about how our panelists have done that, and obviously to answer any questions we have at the end. For those who don't know me, my name is Fiona. I'm working with Mark, director. I was a lawyer in Ireland for years, a corporate lawyer, and then moved 3.5 years ago, where I practiced as a lawyer for 2 years. I've been doing this directorship now for 18 months. So I'll pass over to the panelists to briefly introduce themselves, and we'll get started.
Thanks, Fiona. Thank you, everyone, for coming out. It's great to see so many people packed in this room, and I love the tiered setup. It's nice. So I'm Josh McVeigh. I'm a senior associate at in the digital assets specialist practice here in Cayman Islands. So I started out my career in Australia, practicing as an attorney in Australia, doing a lot of VC deals and M&A transactions out of Asia as well, in Australia, Australasia. I then made my first foray in 2020 to a firm called Walkers, which you may know about. So, and then I recently made a move up to New York to practice with a firm called White Case, building the digital assets team in New York. So practicing as an attorney there, which was excellent. There's a lot to unpack around that, as you can imagine. And recently back with Funnies here in Cayman Islands. So I'll hand it over to the other two to introduce themselves.
Thanks very much, Josh. Thank you to everyone for coming. It's great to see such a full turnout to the event. My name's Karen Kelly, and I'm the associate in the fintech team at Walkers. So I'll probably leave it there, Fiona. I think you're going to do more fulsome introductions a bit later.
Sure, and hi everyone, I'm Tom Stewart from Kerry Olsen, and I sit across the litigation and the digital assets team, and I hail from New Zealand. Maybe we'll leave it there and go into more detail if that's the plan.
Yeah, sure. So I think to get started, I would love if you tell us about your pre-crypto, pre-Cayman practice. So what were you working at? What was your practice before you moved to Cayman and before you moved into this kind of crypto world?
Yeah, so I've been in law for, 7 or so years. I started out as a pure litigator for about 3 years. I then worked in sort of regulatory prosecutions and still maintained a degree of litigation work. That was all in New Zealand. And I moved to Cayman about 2 years ago now. And ever since then, my crypto practice has just grown and grown. And now it's started to take up a large chunk of my days, weeks in life, which is great. So my yeah, that's probably a good little intro.
Thanks so much. So so I'm from England and I practiced mergers and acquisitions. So I'm a corporate lawyer for my sins. So I trained at sort of a local firm. I sort of graduated 2009. So it was in the wake of the financial crisis. So there wasn't a great surplus of sort of training contracts around. So I trained with a local firm, which was really the best grounding that I could have possibly hoped for. And that's where I really learned the fundamentals of corporate law and different corporate structures. And I've worked on a variety of different types of matters for a variety of different clients, not really specialised in Web3 at all. Obviously at the time that wasn't really a thing. So it was more sort of, there was energy and fashion and various different things. But I actually never really thought about a career in law until a bit later. I was definitely wanted to be a fashion buyer. So that's kind of where I went. And I had these visions of, Oscar de la Renta asking me for my opinion on his latest, red carpet dress and having lunches with Anna Wintour and down in Prosecco. But didn't quite work that way. I think I might have been a bit naive, but anyway, so I moved into law, and then I worked for two big international firms, Dentons and Clyde & Co. And then from Clyde & Co, I made the move after mat leave, actually. So I had a year off on mat leave, and then got a recruiter approached me about a job in Cayman. So it sounded great, and that's brought me here.
Excellent. So I have a transactional law background. As you heard, M&A was my primary training route. So started in Australia, doing a lot of project energy type deals, and then moving more into the regulatory space and doing a lot of government consultation around the fintech space. Also, that was probably back in 2017. So Australia's still got a lot of red tape around that, which continues on. So sort of a transactional and also the fintech regulatory side of things, which coalesces nicely to what we do here in the Cayman Islands. Obviously, I went up to White & Case in New York and built the practice there as well. So it's a really nice hybrid for me between the transactional corporate law aspects and also the pure fintech digital asset piece, which I'm sure we'll unpack shortly.
And I think that's really important, is that, all of the lawyers who are really practicing in this space have a really great base, and they've got that kind of background as being, great traditional lawyers specializing in a space, and they've, having that experience is so important. You can't, necessarily wake up one day and become a lawyer in Web3. It's, you've got that kind of fundamental training behind you, which then may inspire a move to specialize in it. So I guess on that note, what brought you into this kind of crypto space? Why did you move your careers into it? And also, I'm curious as to, why Cayman, particularly maybe for you, Josh, because you moved away and then moved back. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so it's a lot of the principles or the legal underpinnings, in my view, in the fintech digital asset space, lend themselves back to corporate principles, transactional principles, and that sort of training base for me, gave me a really good understanding of what to look for. There's obviously, we can talk for hours about protocols, networks, platforms, and the technical aspects around that, but how do we distill that down into what we need to do as a service provider for clients, right? So that's kind of the first piece. The second piece, and what brought me back here, because it is round two, frankly, was Cayman is a really unique jurisdiction for the digital assets market at the moment. So having seen in the US, there's a lot of we know quite well, there's a lot of regulatory, it's not even red tape, there's just not any clarity at the moment. So there is no regulation really. The Cayman Islands and other islands, but specifically Cayman, offers some unique vehicles. It also offers a lot of flexibility in terms of structuring, and has a really robust regime from a regulatory perspective when you consider the time frame of what the digital asset space is working within. So Cayman was really compelling to me, coming from New York and coming from White & Case. I had a lot of clients that were looking to set up offshore structures, and frankly, being a US lawyer, that's not something that you can advise on. It was a lot of the time saying, hey, offshore firms, can you help me with my clients here? Ironically, having already been in Cayman, can you help me set up a structure for the client that wants to look offshore? So the headline for me was Cayman Islands is where it's at for the digital asset space, and it's building effectively an onshore lead jurisdiction practice. So that was really unique, a unique proposition for me.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I would just say, not to sort of be singing from the same hymn sheet, but for me, I moved to Cayman with my family, so it was definitely a lifestyle move first and foremost. But I knew that my good corporate background would serve me well in this jurisdiction. And when I came and started working in the practice area along with Melissa Lim, it very quickly became clear to me that all this required was a good understanding of corporate law. Fundamentally, I had an interest in crypto. Personally, I had invested in Bitcoin and ETH and some Solana as part of a sort of personal investment portfolio prior to coming. But really, I saw the structure and thought, okay, well, this is it's another type of company. It's just a bit different. And it's actually, in my view, a simpler structure than what you would get typically onshore. And what I'm talking about here specifically is the type of, my practice area is foundation companies, just to be clear. So for me, I saw this is a great opportunity to work with really interesting clients, first and foremost. I think that was the thing that really drew me in, because you can work on, a variety of different M&A transactions, right? And it could be anything. It doesn't really matter what the subject matter is. All you need to know is the law surrounding that. You need to have a good commercial understanding. But that comes with time. So for all those kind of budding junior lawyers out there, I would say, get that corporate understanding under your belt, and it will serve you well in the future. And then you can decide, I want to be a sports lawyer. I want to be, hopefully a Web3 digital assets lawyer. And that would, but that grounding is the thing that's going to allow you to, project yourself into any of those areas. So for me, that was kind of what drew me in. And the ability to build a practice, which we're now doing at Walker's, a digital assets practice that is, growing and growing in such a booming industry. So I feel very, very fortunate and lucky to be part of this growing space. And I urge, all of those junior lawyers out there to consider it. For sure.
Great, thanks. I think for me, it's really the innovation of the industry. I mean, and here in Cayman, it's driven actually from within the island. There's a lot of aspects to Cayman sometimes that feel very offshore. It feels as though, maybe Cayman might just be a name on a few corporate documents. But when it comes to crypto, there's a real budding ecosystem, and there's a great network of people who are doing some creative and exciting and groundbreaking things, and it's really quite cool to be involved with that and just to sort of follow people on their journey. I mean, I don't have a background in corporate law. I mean, I'm approaching this from a slightly different angle. So my background is more in litigation and in disputes and in the regulatory side of things. So for me, I mean, I guess it's about not being a handbrake, but also working with projects to show them a path forward that's sustainable and that's going to give them success in the long term and ensure that they adhere to, as Josh has pointed out, what is Cayman's quite robust and rapidly evolving regulatory scheme in a very fast-paced environment. I mean, as those of you in the industry will know, there's MICA in the EU, there's a crazy regulatory landscape in the US, if we want to call it that. And I think Cayman is acting as a real sort of market leader. Obviously, the foundation company aligns very well with crypto and with DeFi, given it's essentially a decentralized vehicle or can function as a decentralized vehicle. But I mean, for me, it's that it's not just Cayman for establishing a company, it's Cayman for the project all the way through. And so, we see all of the hurdles along the way, and it's about working through those, whether they're internal, whether it's founders' disputes, whether it's service providers, or whether it's regulatory issues. I think just being involved in a project, and just, for those of you who do have any sort of litigation experience or have an understanding of being involved in litigation, it's very backward looking. It's always about the facts that happened 3-5 years ago and working out who was at fault and how do you pick up the pieces. And I think the cool thing about this industry and resolving disputes in real time is that you can be sort of part of the solution and help kind of shape the river, as it were. So for me, that's the really cool thing about Cayman. It's the people and the innovation.
And sticking with you, Tom, on the regulation piece. So we always, say with Cayman, you get that regulatory certainty, and that's the appeal here, and that's why a lot of projects come here. But then across the globe, you've got, new regulations coming in. Like you said, Micah, you've got the US that, doesn't really have a regulatory regime. So how does that uncertainty in the regulation space globally impact your practice?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. I think Cayman has built a model which relies on sort of the FATF, or Financial Action Task Force, OECD base, and has taken that and applied it in a really unique way that suits Cayman, and has, although it's new, it's still relatively untested, provided a roadmap for entities, for foundations, and for projects that want to, engage in certain activities and do certain things. And having somewhere like Cayman, where they have the vehicles and they have, a regulatory landscape, I think that provides, it draws people to Cayman, and it opens up a lot of opportunities. Another crazy thing about crypto, of course, is it's not ever in one jurisdiction. It, operates all over the globe. So there's no silver bullet to these problems. And, for as long as we have regulatory uncertainty anywhere, it's going to continue to be a bit of a quagmire. But having Cayman as a location where we can do certain things within a relatively more certain landscape just provides a lot of really cool opportunities for the industry. So yeah.
And then on the litigation side, again, spotlight still on you. What are you seeing in terms of disputes that are coming through the courts? Are the Cayman courts hearing disputes? And then one that I'm personally interested in, a lot of my contracts have arbitration clauses. So are we seeing arbitrations happening yet in Cayman, and how's that going?
Yeah, I mean, taking the second point first, it's a very interesting issue. I mean, arbitration has traditionally been relatively dormant in Cayman, I would say, but it's commonly accepted as a cost-effective way to resolve disputes. It's private, it's fast, it's effective, and a lot of, we're seeing a lot of, terms of use or contracts with providers that have Cayman as the jurisdiction, and we're seeing arbitration is going to be governed under Cayman law. We're still yet to see a huge number of arbitrations in Cayman, but I think it's only going to grow. I mean, if I was going to predict anything, I would say that's going to be one of the key areas of growth for disputes in the Cayman Islands. Cayman has its own arbitration regime that's relatively new and untested. There's also obviously very well-established rules and procedures under things like the LCIA, the London Court of International Arbitration, and American procedures, and those can be tailored to fit the Cayman model. So I think we're seeing it now in the contracts, and we're starting to see some things. We're seeing disputes that could go to arbitration. Most aren't quite yet going there, but I think it's a huge area of growth. As for things that have made their way to the Cayman courts, so far the key areas we're seeing are contractual disputes still, and then insolvency, so projects that have failed, and that's obviously an area that we don't like to see, and we're not seeing a whole lot of. I mean, we're in the middle of a bull market. It might change in a few years. There's obviously good projects and bad projects, but we are still seeing. I spoke before about how litigation's a little backward looking. We do have a couple of cases on at the moment involving the early days of some centralized exchanges, which were very unwritten. No one had any contracts. It was all on the back of a handkerchief. It was pay 45 BNB or do XYZ and we'll give you all of these services. And now it's, okay, well, that's worth a lot of money. And so people are now disputing things. There's no certainty. It's a little unclear. So we've got one case next year that's going to court, which is going to be quite interesting. Watch out for that one. Regarding a centralized exchange, and it'll watch the space, I think.
And I think something we'll get into a bit later is, the different career paths that people can take as lawyers or as ex-lawyers. And when you talk about arbitration, if you're running an arbitration, who's going to be the arbitrator? Are there going to be expert witnesses? And is that where, people with a lot of experience can come in? So we'll maybe get into that a little bit later, but over to you, Carolyn. Would love to hear a bit more about your practice, what you're doing kind of day to day, what your projects are up to.
Sure, thanks, Fiona. So my practice is predominantly foundation companies and the incorporation, and then the ongoing legal services and providing advice to those clients in the Web3 space. So we get a lot of really cool projects that come to us. And like I said, it's understanding the fundamentals of a company. Once you've got that, and then you look at a foundation company, some people are. It's funny actually. It can go one of two ways, because some people can be off-put by it because they think, hang on a minute, a company that doesn't really have shareholders or members, how does this work? And some people are like, hell yeah, let's go. And I think that the anarchist in me leans definitely towards the hell yeah, let's see what we can do here. Disruptive technology, okay. You know, people who are thinking outside of the box and going, actually, we think we can do this a little bit better. We think that, you know, the traditional financial system, which is, you know, why sort of this space is born, was born, weren't quite getting it right. And I think in the 2008-2009 financial crisis really showed us that actually there might be a better way to do things. And, you know, that peer-to-peer transactions could work. And, you know, the regulatory landscape, you know, facilitates that. So that's kind of really why I love this space, but also, yeah, so that's my focus. I do a little bit also of crypto funds as well, and we're seeing more and more funds have digital assets as part of their portfolio. So I think it's going to touch everything. So if you're a funds lawyer, you will see that they will have digital assets as part of their portfolio. That is going to happen. And I think having a good understanding of, you know, the digital asset space helps. Anything that has digital assets in it comes across my desk, because, you know, we do have traditional funds lawyers who are not quite sure maybe about that particular bit in relation to this portfolio. So it's a real value add for people who are interested in Web3 to come in and to really take hold and take charge of this space, because like I said, it is going to just, you know, permeate throughout the whole industry. But yeah, so 95% of my work, I would say, is Cayman Foundation companies and advising on token launches. And like I said, they're in corporations and they're providing ongoing legal advice to them. And it's just, yeah, it's super fun and interesting. So yeah, great stuff.
And one thing that when like I was a lawyer and this practice was evolving, there was a bit of a reluctance maybe on some junior lawyers, but also some mid-level lawyers who thought, you know, I finally have got this. I know what I'm doing. I'm confident in myself. Why would I just change that now and jump into this kind of new space? So for you, what was the appeal in doing this kind of new type of work? Because when you move to Cayman as a lawyer, you're not only moving from onshore law to offshore law, and then to also change the kind of industry that you were working in. What's the appeal? What's so great or interesting about it?
Yeah, I think we all sort of pressed the eject button, didn't we? We were just sort of like, okay, fine. No, I don't really want to do onshore corporate M&A anymore. I think first and foremost, and just being completely honest with everybody in the room, is for me, it was a lifestyle decision first and foremost. So for those of you not familiar with onshore corporate law, it's a lot of fun. It's great. It's really good. But it's hard work. And what I mean by that is the hours are incredibly, incredibly long. And having a daughter, so I've got a 3-year-old now, but the birth of my daughter was a fundamental turning point for me where I thought, okay, so I can either keep commuting into our lovely leafy place in Surrey into London and Guildford, where I was kind of splitting my time, or, you know, I could maybe try something a bit different. And that something a bit different was Cayman. And it wasn't really until I got here that something different then evolved into the Web3 space, because I saw what a great place Cayman is, and it had such a active and sophisticated Web3 industry built up around it, with people like Marfire and Autonomous and others in the industry, all feeding into that machine. And I thought, you know, I can carve myself out here a really interesting niche on work that I'm actually really interested in. And like I said, I think fundamentally as well, it was the type of clients we were getting into, you know, coming to approaches. They weren't the traditional types of clients that we would typically get. You know, you do get a lot of corporate suits, and so these were, you know, people kicking it in high tops and and, you know, chatting on a very real level, who were also of a similar age to me. So there was that very much that nexus, that sort of understanding, you know, on a just sort of subliminal level, I think. That was really, really appealing to me. And I think, you know, for me personally, you know, the tech is super interesting, and I'm getting more and more interested in it. But that came later for me personally. This is an interesting area, and those are the reasons why. But yeah, so I think that's probably a good summation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Over to you, Josh. If you want to tell us a bit about your practice.
Sure. Yeah. So my practice pretty much spans structuring regulatory advice and transactional work. So a big piece for Web3 projects is structuring. Obviously, there's a reason why they've come to Cayman and they're interested around what the jurisdiction can offer. So, setting up the structures in a compliant way, that's a big part. And the regulatory piece, which Tom's been talking about, that's super important to get right up front as well. And from my perspective, the structuring and the regulatory advice go hand in hand, and it's in real time. So you have to be able to advise clients from a regulatory perspective. And sometimes the answer for clients is that's probably not going to work in the Cayman Islands, unfortunately. And then there's another answer, which is, well, you may need to be SEMA regulated, which is typically not a great and well-received answer either. But that being said, that's sort of the transactional aspect feeds across both of those. So, Carolyn's spoken about the token launches as well. So that's a big part of it. So what you do is, and what we do on a day-to-day basis is we assess the project, we look at the activities that they'd like to perform out of a Cayman Foundation, typically for me, and we try to apportion those activities and carve them out in accordance with what the regulations allow you to effectively do. So sometimes that we can dig in later, probably around the technical aspects, but sometimes certain aspects can't put into a Cayman entity, and that's a separate conversation as well. So yeah, and I suppose the second part is around the practice area. I see this, and if you think about practicing law globally, a lot of big law firms, a lot of small law firms, they have typically practice groups or sector practice groups. So I see, at Harney's, I see my practice being sector related, Web3, fintech, and we cover the span of what the legal services require in that sector. So, in Australia, which is 24-hour flight away, there's a big industry called the solar industry. So, energy, renewables, that's not unique to Australia, but there are practices at law firms that focus specifically just on that. And I don't see any reason why we as lawyers can't have a sector-based project where we're skilled up and we're able to advise on all the touch points and stress points for projects. So yeah, that's my practice in a nutshell.
Perfect, thank you. And I guess maybe you could speak a bit to the difference, if any, between kind of the onshore and offshore side, because you've worked within the sector on both sides. So are there any kind of big differences? And I'll also caveat that with one of the things that I loved about practicing in this space was that I felt like I was a lot more involved and a lot more hands-on with projects, that they were relying on their offshore counsel a lot more in terms of guiding them, in terms of drafting, in terms of everything like that, which is something that really appealed to me. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts around that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so in the US specifically, at the point in time when I was there, which was 2022 to sort of late 2023, there was a lot of regulatory, CFTC, SEC work, so a lot of regulatory advice that we were giving. And then, around the structuring piece in the US, typically for a lot of projects, they will have a development company or a labs company that is established in the US. That's can also be established in other jurisdictions like the UK and EU. So setting up those entities and advising around, things like intellectual property and, what that can be used for in the US. And then it kind of ran up to, which is the really interesting point, it bumps up and where the offshore piece, the Cayman piece comes into play is around, okay, how do we might have a test net, we might have a main net, we might be launching, but the token is a huge part of this. And the foundation is going to also be a huge part of this because we really want to push towards decentralization. If you think about decentralization on a spectrum, having a US entity that's a legal personality is pretty centralized. That's on this end of the spectrum. So it was a really interesting point that you get to, especially in the US, and that's kind of setting the regulatory piece to one side. But I'm talking sort of operationally and functionally, the token and also the foundation and what typical foundations do was when they looked offshore. And that's a huge fundamental aspect of these projects, not just developing the protocol, the network, or the platform, but then how do we launch the structure and how do we in certain cases monetize this, and also how do we push to decentralization effectively? And Cayman foundations can be memberless, so that's a really attractive proposition around separation as well. So there's a few moving parts, but if that makes sense, you run up to a certain point in the US where you effectively need to go away for regulatory reasons, and we in Cayman offer an excellent solution around that.
I think something that, for people who are thinking of getting into this sector, there can be a lot of kind of new words almost that people don't necessarily understand, and new concepts, and it can get really technical. So how did you teach yourself? How did you learn about this sector in order to, become great lawyers in the sector? And I'll just open it to whoever wants to start.
I think there's no substitute for being a participant in the sector yourself. I mean, if you actually own crypto, you have your own custody over your wallet. You can buy on a centralized exchange. You know how that works. You know how decentralized exchanges work. You know what staking is. You know how to, maybe you engage in a lending protocol. Some of the stuff can get pretty crazy, and you might not want to be throwing huge amounts of money at it. But even if it's just a small amount of money, to understand the way the network works, and you have a grasp on the fundamentals of the technology, I think there's no substitute for that. I also think there's a lot of material. I mean, one of the key drivers for these projects is decentralization and transparency around the way things work, so that you don't need to rely on centralized actors to do it all for you. You can literally read every single part of the underlying code and the underlying GitHub or Gitbook that explains how it's going to work. And I think if you are going to work in this space, you have to be familiar. I mean, I spend a lot of time on Gitbook. It's funny, it's actually a blocked site at Kerry Olsen. So I have to fight every time to get access to a specific Gitbook or GitHub site, or I have to look it on my phone. But I mean, I find them a hugely helpful resource. I mean, sometimes it's easier when there's a diagram, and then you can understand the way that the various functions within a protocol are going to work and operate. I think that's incredibly helpful. I also think it's a space where we're getting information in kind of a new way. Podcasts are, hugely helpful resource. There's, podcasts for everyone. There's different strokes for different folks. I mean, Chris has recently gotten me into Bell Curve, which is a really good one. Bankless is another one I listen to. There's a few that are useful resources. So I think, participating in the sector, reading the fine print, which I think as lawyers you have to do anyway, and just doing that in the industry helps. And then I think podcasts are really useful. And then, of course, there's no substitute for networking and meeting other people and engaging and getting to know what's sort of on the forefront. And as a regulator, of course, we have to keep, in the regulatory space, keep on top of, I don't know, what the SEC is doing, or the latest Wells notice, or, what's going on in 6-12 months' time. And I mean, I guess shout out to crypto Twitter, but it's, I guess you have to be up on with that a little bit. Not my favorite, but, it is what it is.
Yeah, definitely. I would say all of those are really great suggestions. I think also you're in a really unique position if you're in Cayman, because we have so many great initiatives. You've got sort of the Women in Blockchain initiative. You've obviously got the back events, and Cayman Enterprise City running these fantastic events that you can all go and see and listen to, and be part of the conversation. So that's really important, and that's kind of one of the things I did when I came to the island as well. I would say that I did have an interest in it before. So that did help for sure. So one of the things that I do is, I'll always read CoinDesk a couple of times a day just to see what's going on, see what the latest, happenings are. If Donald Trump decides to back an exchange, and, that's always interesting news. But So definitely keeping abreast of the latest developments in the industry. And also there's really no substitute for, YouTube's a good one. I mean, explaining staking at once, I was like, okay, I need to probably learn about this, because lots of our clients are doing this thing called staking, right? Let's go. And it can feel overwhelming. I would say it's akin to entering kind of the private equity and hedge fund space, where there's a lot of acronyms and there's a lot of overwhelming terms that you just need to familiarize yourself with. And I can hold my hands up and say that, you know, in the Web3 space, there's still a way to go for me, for sure. I think for all of us, some of us are further along in our journey, but I sort of don't profess to be a technical expert. I come at this from I'm a lawyer first, and I can understand the technical side of these things. And so really that's kind of my approach, and just speaking to people, being in the industry, and speaking with my regulatory colleagues as well, who keep us in check and make sure we're doing things. You know, as corporate lawyers, you just sort of gung-ho and you're like, yeah, let's get the deal done, and, you know, let's get it over the line, and for our clients, and we want to make it work. And, you know, that exercise of caution of, you know, let's let's think about this a little bit more. So having conversations with them and making sure that we're advising clients in the right way in compliance with Cayman regulatory law is also fundamentally really, really important. But yeah, nothing beats these conversations that we're all having.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I think it's hard to get away from the Web3 space, even if you're coming from a technology background now. You know, if you're interested in technology, emerging technology, it's a lot of projects are integrating Web3 aspects into their offerings. So, you know, I like to keep up on, you know, obviously the Web3 pieces, but then also, you know, conventional tech as well, because it's really interesting, you know, what we call Web 2 transitioning to Web 3. I think that's only going to become more and more prevalent. So that's how I approach it. It's back to that sector point where, you know, I'm looking at the tech sector, and then also the really interesting sort of coalescing of the Web 2 and the Web 3 space. So yeah, I think in terms of resources, agree with both of you. You know, there's several podcasts, you know, and that's the nice thing as well. It seems like the Web3 space has really embraced sort of the social media aspect as well. You can get YouTube Shorts, for example, and that'll give you, you know, a decent amount of value as well. So it's exciting to be in the sector and have, you know, something that maybe a conventional lawyer, for example, you're not going to go onto YouTube and look at the shorts about, you know, here's a summary. You know, I'm not summarizing a case in you know 15 seconds. That might be an opportunity. You know? So yeah, it's nice. It's nice to feel like you're living in the real time, right? Including around technology. Yeah.
And I think that's really important to remember, is that like everyone who's working in the space has put in time to learn about it. You know, you don't wake up one day and it all comes to you and you understand this whole industry. We're all have spent time learning about it and continue to do so, because it's always changing and you always need to stay up to date. You know, I curate my LinkedIn feed, so I'm getting like really great updates from people in the US who are doing a certain thing, or people in Europe who are looking at this, so that I'm constantly keeping refreshed on that. Within our two firms, Marfire and Autonomous, we've set up a DAO. So we now, shout out to Mike for setting that up, but we now are going to actually, you know, vote for things by using Snapshot and by actually engaging with that. So, you know, if you have a company here, come talk to us and we'll help you do that as well. But it's actually doing the thing that's really important. And also, don't pretend you understand something. If you're having a conversation with someone, you don't know what they're talking about, just ask them. You know, I do it all the time with my clients. I have pitch calls, they tell me what they're doing. I say, I don't understand what you just said. Explain it to me. And that's okay. It's better to know what you don't know and, you know, not over bluff your way through this, because you will get caught out and you also won't learn. So I think you need to almost, not come in with the kind of ego and with anything like that. You need to come in ready to learn. And that's super important in this space as well. And the final point on that is we all learn from each other. I mean, I speak to my other directors on the island all the time. I speak to compliance people I work with. I speak to my lawyers all the time. We're always checking things with each other. We're always, you know, on WhatsApp, on calls, just checking things in the background. So there's a lot of collaboration in this sector, and it's one thing that I really love about it. So, you know, don't be afraid to reach out and to ask the questions.
I'd also just say, Fiona, on that point of, you know, not knowing things. Okay, yeah. As lawyers, it's a really hard thing to admit. Okay, so I've seen this throughout my career of people doing a really good job of pretending that they know what they're talking about. And, you know, that's not criticism. It's just, it's an observation. People come to lawyers, so lawyers think they have to be the font of all knowledge. And if their clients are speaking on a call, I'm not that type of lawyer. You come to me, you will get an honest, okay, let's talk about that. What do you mean? You know, I want to know, I want to understand. That's what you get. You get the hunger to learn and to understand what it is the client does, not just sort of the nodding dog approach. So to those junior lawyers out there, can we make a promise across the board? Don't pretend. Be authentic, be yourself, come with an eagerness to learn, and it will serve you in really good stead.
I think it is important for people to understand, like, what are clients actually doing? What are your clients actually doing in this space? When we were kind of prepping for this, we talked a bit about the intersection between AI and blockchain. You know, are there any real life examples of what your clients are building that, you know, people can relate to? And also, are there any kind of trends that you're seeing out there and kind of what's to come, I guess, in the sector?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, Kerry Olsen works with some of the largest foundations and other entities doing some pretty exciting things. We're seeing a lot more of a push into sort of new areas, testing the waters with things that haven't been done before. We're seeing a lot of liquid staking this year. Seems to be a hot topic for a lot of people. We're also starting to see a huge growth in the sort of stablecoin and new stablecoin market that are sort of doing it in a different way, not necessarily backed by traditional, real world assets, and looking at sort of novel ways to provide those sorts of services. Huge amount of sort of Web3 gaming, things along those lines. And we're also seeing people just do more things in Cayman, more and more directors meetings, more and more personnel coming to Cayman for routine and sometimes just non-routine, things, which is just great to see in the space. I think we're also starting to see, more and more, Cayman's obviously a big part of this, decentralization. I know it's obviously a buzzword, but we're seeing people starting to take it very seriously and actually look at ways to future-proof what they're doing. I mean, it's a pretty exciting time. And just to sort of tie this back to the previous topic in terms of constantly learning, sometimes I get things across my desk and I'm like, how on earth is that operating? And what are they proposing here? It's not as though it's a Bible and you can read the Bible and you can know what's going on. I mean, every year, every month, every week even, there's new things that people are doing, new creative ways of thinking about a problem. And so that's been quite cool to see. I think we're also, which I am starting to see a few more things that tie in with expected regulation. I mean, one really interesting example is a freeze function, an ability on a blockchain to actually freeze assets, which isn't popular for everyone, but from a regulatory angle, it enables you to be compliant in a way that you previously couldn't. And so, I mean, there's a few projects, I won't name any names necessarily today, but that are engaging in those kind of forward-looking things, and they're providing stable coins and other services that are going to be more appealing and going to appease regulators while still preserving decentralization. I mean, I love the idea of a decentralized freeze where it's kind of everyone can vote on it, and if everyone agrees, yeah, it's a good idea, or then maybe you arbitrate it and you work out, well, okay, does everyone think this freeze needs to stay or should we lift it? And if everyone decides it needs to be lifted, well, maybe you just lift it, rather than having that unilateral control. And so I think seeing creative ways people are, taking the space to make sure that it's going to last is really cool. And so we're starting to see a lot of that with some of the big projects we're working with.
Gosh, that's really interesting, actually. So I think probably for the last sort of year, lots of DeFi in this space. And I think lots of people are nodding around the room. Yeah, so it's super, super popular protocol to choose with sort of modifications and improvements and upgrades happening. But the thing that has been really interesting, I think, for me in the last few months has been AI projects. So obviously we know that they're all coming, there's lots of talk about AI and its capabilities, and it's a growing industry. So one specific one that springs to mind is Story Protocol just got a Series B fundraising round of about 80 million, and they're sort of converting intellectual property into kind of IP Legos. So it's like these modular, programmable assets that store kind of licensing and royalty terms on the blockchain. So if you're a creator of content, so for example, you're a songwriter or a poet or somebody, there's this: how do you protect that IP? You're the original content creator. Sort of Google or YouTube would give you a kickback if you were, if they were using your IP. But what about if AI is using it? So how do we, that's the question that they have tried to answer, which is, okay, well, we'll use a smart contract, we'll program royalties and licensing fees. So if if you have somebody using your IP, you will get paid, you will get remunerated for that. So I thought that was just really interesting. And also, I also read about Coinbase conducted their first A to AI transaction, crypto transaction, which was just great. So I'm seeing a lot more AI projects, either AI, that they're coming to us and they are AI projects, or existing projects integrating AI into their existing projects and protocols. So that's been a super interesting thing for me to watch and being interested in it anyway. And one of the things I also saw was that Mango, which I don't know whether that is on this side of the world, but it's a sort of UK-based fashion brand, a sort of high street fashion brand. And they launched their first ad campaign using generative AI. So, that's transformative. If you think to the fashion industry who are looking at, for good or bad. So when I say transformatory, I don't mean it's always necessarily a good thing, but you have these fashion shoots where you've got to get all of the all of the models and all the photographers and all the clothing and all the rest of it, and it's costly for fashion brands. And so by implementing fully or even partially, doing this by AI, you can see how revolutionary that is for the fashion industry, but they can cut their costs right down. And you're getting these incredible ad campaigns that show, that are brilliant, basically, because they're just so visually stimulating. So yeah, that's been super interesting, and that kind of merged my two loves. One's very old, but so great space, it's really exciting, and the fact that we get to work on these projects, this is one of the main reasons why I am working in this space. It's just like super interesting as you read about AI and all these different exciting projects that people are coming up with. People are great, people are so creative, and it just makes me happy to be part of it, really.
Yeah, the great thing about the blockchain is that it's a really good way to store data. So for AI projects, that's really helpful, the data that do collect. So if you secure it on the blockchain, then you've got a pretty robust model. A lot of projects that I have at Harney's, they're not only, AI projects, but they're also integrating AI concepts, which is really interesting. Another one that I kind of, it's less glamorous, but what I really am, excited about is the conventional Web 2 and let's just say conventional players and business lines really adopting the Web 3 space and blockchain solutions, and everything from decentralization through to token issuances. I think it's really nice to see things like education programs that are integrating Web3 into their platforms and providing solutions for example, coders in different jurisdictions being able to provide code to an open source environment and be rewarded for that and paid in some form of currency. And I think that's really cool, because I think that kind of at the grassroots builds what Web3 is really about. That's really nice. I have a client that's also integrating AI, and basically to that extent they have coders and also education contributors that will contribute pieces of knowledge into the platform, and they'll be rewarded for that, which is great. And they're entering into contracts and getting contracts with a lot of the government agencies around the world, which is that's really exciting as well. So it's less glamorous, but I think that's an amazing piece that we have now that we didn't have 2 years ago even. So that's really inspiring.
Before we move on to questions, we might finish up with any kind of career advice that you'd have for younger lawyers, because that's what we're here to talk about. Any career advice in terms of, if you're considering a move into this sector, what could you do to help with that? But also any career opportunities out there as well, which I think is less talked about, but is also, really interesting.
I think if I were to be giving myself advice when I was starting out, I think the things I would have said were, don't worry if what you're doing in this exact isn't your love and you aren't enjoying every moment of it, because there are so many opportunities that will come your way if you just stick it out. And I would also say it's easy to fall into a routine in law, and it's easy to feel trapped because you feel as though you need to do your time and see it out. I do believe you need to do your time. I think it is important to get the fundamentals. I think that's one of the key sort of pillars or one of the takeaways from the session. But at the same time, I think just because everyone else is doing something a certain way doesn't mean you can't break the mold. And if you want to do something a little different, breaking the mold is the best way to do that. And it generally throws you outside your comfort zone. You grow a lot faster than if you just stayed in the same track the whole time. And I've been in 3 or 4 different firms over 7 years, doing slightly different things each time. And I think that journey has been a huge part of, huge growth for me. I think other advice I would give is just follow your nose. If you feel as though an area of your industry interests you, whether or not it's blockchain, Web3 or not, if it does interest you and you truly want to work in it, you'll likely be able to if you just put in the time, do the work, start working outside. If you have to do your job in the 9 to 5 or the 8 to 7, maybe you've got to do some other stuff outside of that to sort of move, segue. I think just do what you love, and you will find that there are opportunities. So yeah, those are probably a couple of tips that I.
Yeah, that's so true. There really is no substitute for learning fundamentals. So when I was training, I had a really good supervisor who said that corporate law is like building blocks. So you learn the fundamentals at the bottom and then you build on that. And I think getting that fundamental base there's no substitute for it. And what that requires is just get your head down and do the work, put your hand up, get your head down and put your hand up. For all types of work. Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how that works. For all types of work, you want to see as much of what you can, and that goes back to then you can decide, hey, actually, you know what, I really like this. But getting that fundamental building block, whether that's corporate lawyer or as a litigator or whatever, but get that fundamental base, and then you can build and build and build and build. And I've been doing this for sort of 2 years, about 2.5 years since now moved to UK, and I can say that fundamental building block is the thing that I go back to the most, because you strip away everything else, and clients ask you questions, people are asking you questions about it's just the fundamentals of corporate law, that bread and butter, and everything else around it. You've got to know it. It's the extra noise, those that you focus in. So head down, hands up.
Yeah, I think there's no substitute for that at all. Spending 2.5 years in New York definitely rang that for me. I think my advice would be at a base, start with choosing a practice group or a sector that you're interested in. And as a junior lawyer, there's an inflection point that you get to as a lawyer. It's hard to see when you start out, but there is an inflection point where you become relatively good at what you do. And that's you'll always be challenged, and there's always that's probably about 60% of the time, but there is days where you become more and more of an expert. So if you have that specialist and that expert mindset, and you work towards that, and you try to play the long game with your career, and I think it's actually really important to also think about what you do in the context of what other people do as well. Like my wife is here as a management consultant, so I mean, there's a lot of crossovers in that as well. But what I think is the really important point when you're in that sort of that junior phase is reflect on what your sector or practice group is, the deliverables within that, and unpack how you work within that, and what you actually find gives you some form of energy. It might be because what is interesting to separate is, oh, okay, I actually do it with a positive or a sad point for me, but I got to the point where I'm like, I do actually like reviewing contracts, which is quite grim. Yeah, so there's hope. But there is a point where it feeds into, you become good at that, and you become the go-to person for that, and it becomes enjoyable, and you sort of manifest that in a way. So that's the tiny light, I think, at the end of the tunnel. There's no substitute for the building blocks, as you said, absolutely. But it's really playing that long game and how do you work, what you like to work on, and focusing on your strengths and also identifying your weaknesses. Because trust me, you will get to a point where you're an expert. Yeah.
And I think one thing as well to conclude is that, we're all here in the Cayman Islands where we have this thriving industry with so many opportunities. So, if you're in private practice, if you become really good at this stuff, maybe there's a faster path to promotion and things like that, because it's a new sector. You don't have maybe kind of partners that are way above you that have this expertise. So there's a big opportunity there. There are general counsel, in-house counsel roles. Many of our clients are looking to move people to Ireland to act as their general counsel and to live here. So, if you're here already and you have that expertise, there's so many opportunities. And then also you can become a director, or you can become another kind of service provider and things like that. But I think that's the joy of this industry, that if you become really good at what you do and you're really passionate about it, well, then there's a world of opportunity out there for the taking. We can pass over to the audience for any questions. Mark, I see your hand up.
First of all, thank you very much, Tom, Carolyn, Josh, Fiona. That was really insightful. Really enjoyed that. Thank you. I want to actually build on one of your final questions, Fiona. And do you have any message for aspiring Caymanian lawyers, and this is for any or all of you, including you, Fiona, for how best they can position themselves to be at the forefront of this space and take advantage of those opportunities as very, very junior lawyers or article clerks? 3 questions. Second question, what do you see as the biggest challenges in this space for geopolitically, the sector as a whole, and locally? And this is in the context of virtual assessing payment. And third, no financial advice, no reliance. What have you aped it on, please?
Yeah, go crazy, guys.
Wow. I knew it was going to be. Okay, so to the first question, I think it's probably like anything else, but if you're interested in the area and you are a young Caymanian and you want to grow in the space, it's really just about showing your initiative. You don't have to show a whole lot of skill initially or knowledge of the industry, because that'll come. If you are willing to put in the time and learn and see how other people do it, pick up their habits, and just engage with what's going on and show that you are there for the long haul and that you really want something from this. And I think this is true of anyone, Caymanian or not Caymanian, but I think that would be a key thing. Geopolitical risk. I mean, this is being live streamed. What we say. I mean, there's obviously a lot of geopolitical risk around elections at the moment. There's a lot of tensions in various places, militaristically or otherwise, and all of these things create problems for any financial market. Crypto is no exception. It's inherently volatile. We've been on a good bull market for a while now. I mean, I think, to the extent that any dramatic event eventuates, there's always going to be some pretty serious risk. But I think that the truly sustainable projects stand the test of time, and it's not, if your project is only going to work when times are good, it's probably not that good of a project. I think it's about underlying value rather than just quick wins. And so what was the last question again? Well, I mean, if I told you that, I'd probably have to kill you. I'll save that for these two.
So I think one of the things that I was, that I've been speaking to people about as well is sort of any change in the US, particularly with the upcoming election, and a more favourable government sentiment towards the crypto industry is positive, for sure. From a Cayman perspective, we shall see. If the landscape here that we've created is a lot of it, they want to be offshore. There are reasons for that, particularly US clients. It's a challenging regulatory environment in the US. So if that headwind changes slightly, we might not see as much work. That's if I'm being brutally honest about, my personal concerns. So that is one thing that I have been, thinking about. I actually can't remember your question, so I'm going to leave it to cop out, absolutely.
Yeah, I think in the US at the moment, geopolitically is one thing, but then there's also, just the general economics of what the US has at play, and that, where the funds are and where centralization meets decentralization. I think for the likes of, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, I think we know for a fact that they're dipping into these things. It's obviously a strategic play for them to keep the reins on the regulators and the agenda. I think that we'll see a coalescing of that probably in a few years' time, where there's we already have a lot of large funds flowing into the space. But whether the election sheds any light, bears any fruit from a regulatory perspective, we'll see. So obviously from broader regulatory, we've also got other sort of jurisdictions, for example, Dubai, Middle East. So that's interesting as well in terms of where Cayman sits. I think in order for Cayman to continue to be competitive, I think we need to be cognizant of that. And I think it's a really segue to the young advice for young Caymanians. I think you're on the cutting edge and you have a source into the geopolitical aspects of what the digital asset industry is dealing with at the moment, because it's relevant, very relevant, in a much better position with the regime we have than the US, right? Where there's a lack of that and sort of an economic resistance. So if you are looking to get involved, it's absolutely the place to be, because you are on the cutting edge of where the industry is at, not only jurisdictionally, but also from a legal perspective as well. So, and what is really interesting is US counsel and having been US counsel, back to your point earlier, Fiona, they do lean on offshore counsel a lot, right? So we are, and that's the term lead counsel probably doesn't mean much right now, but that effectively means that you're taking the reins. You're responsible as legal counsel for running the transaction, for advising the project, where typically there's substantial operations are. So that's a really interesting, divergence from other offerings that Cayman has offered in the past. But it's a really exciting piece as well. So you've got an opportunity to jump into what I have seen, onshore work in an offshore jurisdiction. So I think that's really powerful.
Sorry, I would just build on that now that I've remembered your first question, because John answered. For all those aspirant lawyers, Walkers also runs a sort of scholarship program. So, please do get in touch with me if any of you out there are interested in that. And also, ask questions. So we had people come to us recently of really enthusiastic, budding lawyers, and they were all really hungry, and they asked loads of questions about the space, and I was really sort of quite taken aback. This is, a space that's been around for a long time now, and I would still say in its infancy, but it's not really, in a way. Like, we've been, it's been going on now for a while. So they had the hunger and the knowledge, that I didn't expect. But the thing that stuck out to me was they asked lots of questions. And for me, we want to grab as many of those junior minds as we can and get them into this space. So ask questions is the takeaway from me.
Hobus.
I have a one-part question. For Josh specifically, being in New York, you obviously returned to Cayman. That might be partially because you know it and you like it. But from the stuff you saw there, how much actually comes to Cayman yours. We all obviously all here think that we're pretty great and we do pretty good work here, but is it the main jurisdiction or do we kind of share it?
Yeah, very good question. So starting from the bottom up, time zones mean a lot, especially to New Yorkers. They don't want anyone in Europe, or they don't want anyone that's effectively not in their time zone. So that's maybe that's a broader New Yorker point. Yeah, so there's that aside, there is a lot of confidence in the Cayman Islands from a conventional financial services perspective. It's a well-trodden path, and I think a lot of these, especially in the DeFi space, what is a typical movement in the US is a startup DeFi protocol that raises a lot of funds and is successful, and they make the transition actually from the West Coast to the East Coast. So it's a very interesting, it's a very interesting move because there's a lot, what we would call the East Coast traditional finance, and you've got Silicon Valley where that's startup territory and Palo Alto and the rest of it. So a lot of the work does come to Cayman. I think if we're talking specifics around, regulatory certainty at the moment, MICA is doing something that's interesting because you can effectively get a piece of paper which says you're good for now, which gives some projects some comfort. But I think what we have is actually, something that's reasonably clear as well. I don't think that just because you're getting a piece of paper that's necessarily, going to trump the regime in general. So that the micro is quite new as well. But yes, in broadly speaking, there is a lot of confidence and there is a lot of, effectively another point in the Cayman Islands is what a lot of projects care about is service providers. So if you don't have a robust network of service providers in a jurisdiction, you aren't going to be able to, outside of the legal services, right? You need things like ops, you need accounting. If there's no confidence or if there's not even no confidence, there's just not that market and that robust service provider, including directors as well. I mean, that's some of the feedback that I've had from the Middle East at the moment is, we're not confident that we can find the level of service and the service providers that you have in the Cayman Islands. That's a great thing for us to maintain and really value. So that's a big point, the service provider point at the moment. Yeah.
I also think as a jurisdiction, it's not something that we can take for granted. I think it's really important that what we do, we're doing a good job at it. We're like implementing, risk mitigation, controls, everything like that in place because this sector isn't perfect. There's been bad things that have happened out there, but what's important is that we maintain integrity within the sector and within what we're doing. And that is hugely important for Cayman as a jurisdiction as it builds out this, whole new sector for itself.
No more questions? Well, big round of applause to our speakers. Thank you so much. I know I stand between you guys and some networking, so I'll be really quick. Thanks again to our sponsors, Cayman Enterprise City, the Blockchain Association of Cayman Islands, Stepping Stones Tech Recruitment, and Digital Cayman for putting this all together. Our next talk, we have a FinTalks events with Raul Paul from Real Vision on the 17th of September. So check out the enterprisecayman.ky website for details. And thank you all for coming and enjoy the networking.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye. And that's great on the live stream. Oh, really?